Let's talk about elements and principles of design as they're related to a visual design analysis. Visual analysis is a part of reverse engineering. Some of the other parts are functional analysis and structural analysis. We'll get into those a little later. But for now, we're going to focus on the elements of design as they are for engineering design. I want you to consider a point. A point has no dimension. It's just a location. But if I take 2 points and connect them together, I can get a line. A line can then be circled back around on itself to create a circle, or connected together with 3 line segments to form a triangle. These are shapes. So a single point can have a second one connected to make a line, and a line can be connected together to make a boundary that we call a shape that's 2-dimensional. 0 dimension, 1 dimension, and 2-dimensional. If I add a 3rd dimension to that shape, I can get a form. I can do this by taking a circle with a central axis and revolving it around that axis, and I get a sphere. Or I could take that circle and take its perimeter and extrude it all the way in another direction and get a cylinder, a 3-dimensional form. I can also take the center of that circle and pull the center point up and get a cone, or take a rectangle with a central axis, revolve that rectangle around it, and get a cylinder. All forms are made from shapes, all shapes have lines, and all lines have an infinite amount of points that are infinitesimally small or large. Forms take up space, both positive and negative, both cluttered and uncluttered, or open or busy. They have color that can have a value to it. And that color, those lines, those shapes and forms, the space that it takes up, the value that's applied to that color can help us understand an emotion or imply an emotion if we need to. And these things all also have a texture that can be created by the points and lines of a shape or a form. Something that feels smooth or rough, maybe even fluffy. So let's remember that a point is the most basic element of design. There's absolutely no dimension to it. There's just a position, or we use it to indicate some type of location. We can describe this on a coordinate plane. Here we see that the point of this rectangular prism is at -2 in the x, 2 in the y, and 3 in the z. Lines are one-dimensional. Think about this image in the top right corner. Do you see 3 circles and a triangle? Do you see 3 Pac-Men and a triangle? Do you see 3 arrows? Maybe the triangle is on top of 3 circles, or the circles are eating the triangle, or the circles are cutouts of a black shape, and they're not even real circles, but rather just big pie wedges missing out of the circle. What about this one? Black and white lines with a black star. Is it white lines on a black background that stop short and make the star shape? Or is the star punched out of a black and white background? Think about these lines here. Because they get smaller as they go back in depth of this image, it implies this has a type of movement. The curvature of this line can imply some type of emotion. We can create a texture. We can create a perspective, like in this image. We can create some type of depth. We can indicate a volume or a boundary. We can use all of our elements, especially lines, to imply some type of emotion. There are 4 basic types of lines: vertical lines, horizontal lines, diagonal lines, and curved lines. Vertical lines are typically thought of as representing some type of dignity or formality, having stability and strength. In architectural purposes, this is often thought of as being a masculine feel. Horizontal lines often represent calmness and peacefulness, relaxation. Think of things like the Empire State Building, very sturdy, tall, strength of a building there, right? But Horizontal lines, think of a bed, getting a massage and laying on a massage table. Calm, peacefulness, inviting. Diagonal is the opposite of this. Diagonal represents action and activity, some type of excitement or movement. Curved lines are like the opposite of a vertical line. We have a representation of freedom and nature, giving an appearance of softness or creating a soothing feeling or mood. Often vertical and diagonal lines will go together, and often horizontal and curved lines will go together. But if we're going to try and bring in some sort of contrast, we might purposely have them contradict one another. Here we see some examples of vertical lines. The Empire State Building, very tall, straight lines. It's not the only lines that we see, but we definitely are led upwards with our eyes to follow these vertical lines. The Brandenburg Gate, lots of vertical line use here, going up and up and up to a horizontal lintel that has tiny little vertical lines that lead our eyes to another set of horizontal lines that have a diagonal movement up to where we see these horses and the bird at the top. They are contrasting the rest of this building or this structure. They're jumping off of the top at a diagonal line with the bird's wings going up diagonally as well. But the vertical part of this is what gives it its strength. It shows that it's holding the top of this building up. Here we see horizontal lines being used. This community Christian church in Kansas City, Missouri, made by very famous architect Frank Lloyd Wright, is all about this part of it right here, this really low, wide, overhanging area. There's not a lot of windows all over the building, but in this place, we see that if you're inside looking out, all you see is the outside, and it brings it in. Horizontal lines. It's not a very tall building. It's a very low building with long horizontal lines. Diagonal lines give us that sense of movement or action, kind of activity, like, should I be looking up this pyramid or down this pyramid? It leads my eye in one direction or the other. Same with this structure. Here I have the diagonal line represented by these windows in this part of the ceiling that leads my eye back and forth from the two activity parts of this room, where I'm going to sit and watch TV or where I'm going to eat. My eyes are brought up and over and around and then down. Notice the curvature of this lamp and the curvature of this portion of it up here at the top of the ceiling, as well as the curvature of these chairs, all mimic each other. Even this chair is set at a diagonal to open up the space for this area. Notice how the rectangular shape of this TV that's red contradicts the organic shape of this green plant. What do you think of when you see this building? Is it ocean? Waves? Maybe ski slopes? Maybe you see something there that others don't, but most represent this in their mind as being something that is more natural, something like waves, something like the ocean, a white sand beach. Blue tinted glass helps with that. The blue curve of the roof helps with that. Think about the Sydney Opera House and how open and free it kind of feels, but at the same time, it also represents things like shark fins and dolphins and the waves of the Sydney harbor that it sits on. It is also mimicked in the background by this bridge. Well, let's talk about color. Color really does have a lot of impact on the designs around us. We can use color to really motivate people in one way or another. We can use color to imply hunger or action, activity. We can use some very base colors to do this, but we can also get into some more exotic colors, things like golds and silvers. There are more colors out there than what we see represented in this color wheel. But in this color wheel, we see the primary colors of red and blue and yellow. Notice how they split this into 3 equal parts. You have the secondary colors like green, orange, and purple. And then you have even the tertiary colors that fall between them, like a yellow-green color and a yellow-orange color and an orange-red color. And we have other names for these as well, and all of the colors in between. We can even apply some tints and tones and shades to them to create various different values so that we have a lightness and darkness to our colors as well. It's represented here as going from black all the way to white. And then you can get into this saturation of this tone of having this pure color all the way through down to a gray color. Colors on the left of the color wheel are considered cool colors. Colors on the right are considered warm colors. Cool colors best represent calmness and relaxation, and warm colors best represent action and activity. We can also entice people to feel a particular way, like hungry, with warm colors. Think about fast food, Bojangles, McDonald's, even Subway uses yellow, but it also uses green. Eat fresh. Subway's all about things being not like the other fast food restaurants. Things that are a little more inviting and friendly. McDonald's has quickly started to realize that people have picked up on this, and now they're using more earth tones, but they still have the golden arches and the big red sign. So if color can have an immediate and profound effect on a design, does it always mean the same thing? And the answer is no. Now we think of green as being friendly to the environment. Go green. Recycle. Use an electric car. When I was a kid in the 80s, green was the color of envy and money. It changes over time. Value can be applied in a couple of ways. Here we see very oversaturated color usage and very undersaturated color usage. The one in the middle, that ducky in the middle, has just the right balance of highlight and shadow. Yeah, there's a little bit of the wing that you can't quite see the detail of, but it shows that this thing is three-dimensional. It doesn't look so flat. We lose that definition when we have too much lightness, and we lose that definition when we have too much darkness and too much color, as opposed to a nice balance of light versus dark. Here we see value being used to create something that is two-dimensional look three-dimensional. Where I have a dark value, it's a shade, and its darkness represents how much light is not entering that area. And the absence of that gray or black color allows for the white to act as a highlight. This can allow us to have a three-dimensional shape when we've drawn something two-dimensionally. We can see that underneath this steering wheel, it's kind of cavernous. Light doesn't get there. It's an open space that I could put my feet. This helps us understand the shapes and the forms that we can create. Shapes are typically thought of as being either geometric, mechanical, or organic. These are 3 common types of shapes. In the image on the left, we can see examples of geometric shapes, like circles and rectangles, various different polygons. Here in the middle, these mechanical shapes are created by taking something like a circle and removing other shapes from it, like a trapezoid, to create a pattern that we call the outside of this gear, or sprockets. Even the circles are repeated in a pattern and it's been removed. So a combination of these geometric shapes can create a mechanical shape. We can even use very free, open flowing lines to create organic shapes. This chair is based on the organic shape of this leaf. What do you see when you look at this Secret City Barracuda design? Kind of looks like a fish, especially from above. It's why it's called Barracuda. A form is nothing more than a two-dimensional shape that's been transformed into a three-dimensional object. We can make these happen on a two-dimensional surface by adding just the right kind of value, the right kind of highlights and shadows, using just the right tints and tones and shades. Even if it's just a gray color, we can go all the way from bright white on this sphere to almost black and separate it from the gray background, and it still represent a three-dimensional object, even though you're seeing it on a two-dimensional screen. We can have objects that seem very geometric and very organic, very mechanical as well. Even though they're not shapes, they are based on shapes. They are the three-dimensional version, forms. Here we see examples of forms in architecture from around the world. Even as far back as the ancient Egyptians understood the importance of the geometric forms, as well as moving forward some of the more organic shapes that can be creating or used to create forms. All of these things take up space, have value, have texture. But the space that they take up is broken into two basic types, positive and negative. Notice in this image, all the people sitting around the tables and all their stuff on the tables are the positive parts of this image. They're the positive space. You can move around them in this negative space, but it's all relative. The tables relative to the floors become positive space. But the tables themselves, without people around them and all of their stuff, are a negative space as well. Things occupy space and therefore are positive. Things that don't occupy space, or when they're not there, it's negative space. In this image, the sphere, with all of its lines, texture, value, color, take up positive space. And the space around that sphere, even though there's some color and a little bit of texture, it's not the focal point and it's not consuming the image. It is the negative space, relatively speaking, for this image. Spaces can also be open and uncluttered, or cramped, cluttered, and busy. This image represents something that is cramped and busy. We can barely make out the sky in the distance. The water is a boundary for us, but it leads our eye towards a bridge. The buildings lead our eye up to the arch that's right in front of us. It blocks our view of the rest of the sky. In this image, a lot of what we see is taken up with texture, color, shapes and forms, lines, points. But the open space in this organic shape here is the only thing that feels uncluttered or open to us. The opposite is happening in this image. Lots of horizontal lines helping us feel relaxed that quickly start to come together and lead our eye to this round shape, very free, open space that then looks busy and cluttered, even though it's the focal point. And everything around it feels very open. Even the diagonal lines of the side of this flooring leads our eye to this round, cluttered space that is the outside. Having a contradiction of the outside feeling cluttered while the inside feeling open plays with our senses and our emotions. Texture can be broken into two basic types, smooth and rough. Now there is a third type we'll talk about in a moment. But the two most basic types are smooth and rough, reflecting a lot of light like we see in this sphere, or even this one, or this one down here. We could imagine reaching out and touching them and feeling very little texture. But on this one, a whole lot of texture. Each of these panels will feel very smooth, but we'll be able to tell the difference between them. This one will feel very smooth with very little texture. Where the light bounces back and hits our eye creates a highlight. The more highlights and the more intense the color is, the more smooth something will feel. If the light bounces off of the object and goes in another direction, we create a shadow and it appears to absorb the light. So things with lots of angles feels more rough and appears darker. It absorbs more of the light. Here we see a very smooth wall, very reflective paneling. And in this structure, it seems very rough. Light is going everywhere, and not much of it is coming back to our eye. We do see some highlight. We can tell what the color is. But a lot of darkness, a lot of shadow, it makes this image feel more gritty or rough. And then there's a third type. Fluffy. Something that's soft, comforting. It's not quite smooth. It's not quite rough. It's soft. It's fluffy. Those are the elements. Think of them as being the ingredients to food. The food that we make. The food we're making are the principles. We can even take these principles and combine them together and make other food or other principles. So all of those 8 elements will then be used to create these 7 principles. A balance to something, an emphasis to something, utilizing a contrast or a rhythm, there being a proportion and scale to the use of these elements, or even the use of some of the principles. Having a unified type of element or unified principle being used, or the lack thereof and it being economical or simple. Balance is broken into 3 major types. Symmetrical, also known as formal, asymmetrical, also known as informal, and radial. The distribution of the elements within a design is what helps us get this visual and physical balance to the things that we design. And the things that we design are, well, everything. We design the things around us. Let's take a look at symmetrical or formal balance. The image on the left has a balance of color, shapes, forms, lines, even texture. If I were to draw a vertical line right through the middle of this picture, it has a left to right or horizontal balance. Everything on the left is mimicked the same on the right. And it is pretty much a perfect or symmetrical or formal balance. Same thing if I take this face made out of vegetables and fruits. Everything on the left is mimicked on the right, and almost perfectly. A very good example of a formal or symmetrical balance. Center line running right through the middle. In this case, vertical line, horizontal balance. Over here, I can do the same thing. A vertical line running right through the center of this image produces the same imagery on the left as on the right. There is a horizontal symmetrical balance. But if I take this picture and I come down and I put a line not right through the center horizontally, but I bring it down right around here. About a 2/3 movement down from the top or 1/3 of the way up from the bottom. And I draw a horizontal line. The top has open space that is roughly the same amount as the space that's down here. There is an asymmetrical balance to the space of this image. Asymmetrical balance is hard for people to get. We refer to this a lot of times as informal. The elements within the design are not identical, but are arranged to provide a balanced visual weight. Imagine dropping a vertical line right through the center of this image. If you look at how much space is taken up by this Moravian star, it would be roughly the same amount as the space not taken up on the left side of the image. The same can be said about this image here. There's an asymmetrical balance to this image. It's a difficult thing, and some people enjoy it more, while others don't. It creates an almost uncomfortable or contrasting feeling. Here we have radial balance. No matter where I put the line of symmetry, everything on both sides matches. Wheels, domes, spheres, things that are round. I have a pattern that goes around that center point. Emphasis is used to draw your attention to one area. It's a focal point, if you will. This can be done through things like size and placement, shape, contrast, or even the use of lines. Let's break these two images down. Notice how, in the image on the left, we've used the human size to help us with this emphasis. We've also used some unity, some lines, some shape. Look at how these columns have a difference in texture and color right about the same height as this human. Notice how the curvature at the top of these cylindrical columns is also mimicked in the curvature of the indentations in the ceiling. It's also mimicked in the shape of our focal point, but there's actually a few focal points here. The line of sight that this person has makes you want to look at this artwork on the ceiling. All the action lines draw your attention to it. The unity of the colors here and in the person, as well as the unity of all of the very beige-like colors used in the entire image, and the lines drawing our eyes upward. The image on the right gives us emphasis of this person right here in the top right corner of it. Right around 1/3 of this image is focused, whereas 2/3 of this image is not. And even beyond that, the real focus is on the person who is in focus, walking on a tightrope line that's moving at a diagonal, showing us that there's action. The juxtaposition of this is fantastic. Open, almost nothing out here, and a single line that goes out of focus to in focus to out of focus again as it moves across 1/3 of this imagery. With a person who is contrasting the color that they're standing on and that's in the background. Brings our attention directly there. It's the only thing there. The economical viewpoint that we get here, it's so simple. There's nothing else for us to look at. It draws our attention to it. Here in this image we see a belt buckle going into where it clicks in. And we may notice that it's a different type of texture than the actual button. We get this real shiny metallic look to the buckle, and the button itself is a flat, matte red. But it's the only thing that's red. Everything else is more of kind of a gray or black color. Look at the contrast here. Look at these rectangular prisms. Do they appear to rotate as well as be different colors from the red one? Green, green, green. This one stands out because it's red. But also notice that because of our perspective, we see a little more of the darkness as we move to the right. The contrast of big, strong, vertical lines versus more of a curved and diagonal line. The contrast of the colors. Contrast of the texture. Shiny, blue, white, dark, black, gray, curved, lots of shadow. Metallic, glass, concrete. The contrast here. This is the only thing that's man-made, but it does have some unity. There is some organic shape in this structure, which is mimicked in the organic shapes of all of the nature around it. The color of this red contrasting the green color, drawing our eye around and to this very differently colored object in the middle, which looks a lot like these stones but a little brighter. That contrast can create an emphasis. Here we see the contrast being very simplified. Not only do we have a contrast in the text that's here, in Taxi Project with a K, but project misspelled, like Toys R Us having the backwards R, is green and a slightly thinner font, slightly different font altogether. The yellow of the people, who are very simplified versions of people, but the shapes of them, just the small basic boundary lines colored in, let us know that it's people. It's not that they are a particular person that's important, but rather that the shape and size of people can fit in this car in a particular way. Even the green arrows, which have a unity with the project part of Taxi Project, show us how things move. And the car itself, we're really looking at not the colors of the car, but rather the more or less details of its space. It's simplified. The contrast between the yellow and the white and the green and how they're placed is what we're looking at. We can emphasize with contrast. One principle creating another one by using the elements. Rhythm is broken into 4 parts: regular, random, gradated, and graduated types. So when we have a repeated use of a line or a shape or a color, a texture, any kind of pattern, we can have a rhythm of any element and in many cases some principles. We create this harmony. Regular, random, gradated, and graduated. Regular and random are a little easy to spot. Gradated and graduated often get confused, so let's break them down. Regular, it's the same thing over and over again, and the interval or the repetition seems to be the same as well. It's the same size, brick, color, tile over and over and over again. Some slight differences to maybe the patterns within the tiles themselves, but still the same basic thing happening. Same with these houses in Denmark. And not only do each of those structures get repeated, but even the elements within them get repeated over and over and over again at a regular interval. Let's go almost opposite of this, where we have random. It's the same basic thing, lots of lines, same weight, same color, the same basic organic shapes over and over again, but at random intervals. They don't ever seem to have any kind of true pattern other than to not have a pattern in their spacing or in their usage, like in this image over here. Lots of onion domes repeated over and over again, but they're all slightly different in their shape, in their size, in their texture, and their patterns within them. Even these little half circles being repeated over and over again, all slightly different when you move from one onion dome column to the next. Lots of unity, but also lots of randomness. Random seems to be more exciting than regular. Gradated is akin to regular. Gradated is the same repeated element. It's identical, with the exception of one thing about it, either increasing or decreasing with each repetition. In this case, it's the size that changes. The size of these rocks change as we go from the bottom to the top or top to the bottom. They get flatter and flatter and flatter and smaller and smaller and smaller in size. Same with the Russian nesting dolls or the pagoda roofs. Or even the spacing between all of the columns in the pagoda roofs. They seem to be the same element, over and over again, but something about them changes. Now, when we talk about spacing, we have to be careful because we can have a graduated rhythm. It gradually changes, and we're really focusing now on the spacing. So if you look in this image from the bottom left corner, moving into this big, open, more white space, we see that all the circles start to spread out from each other. Not necessarily at a regular interval, that would be gradated, but because they're just kind of expanding away, it's more of a graduated rhythm. So gradated and graduated kind of have some similarities, but graduated is more closely kin to random, and gradated is more closely kin to regular. Graduated is all about that gradual change. There's also a lot of unity that happens in this imagery as well. And even a 1/3, 2/3 proportion. You take a line that's drawn with all this white open space here, which ends on this woman who has on a white dress. Her hair, her skin color are the same kinds of colors that we see happening in the area around her. And this is about 2/3 of this image, while there's about 1/3 of it right here that feels more cramped and cluttered, and as if the spacing between the objects is closer together. There's even proportion and scale, which is part of proportion. This is a comparative relationship between elements in a design with respect to size. So how big one thing is versus another. I like to think of this as part versus the whole. So if you consider proportion to be important, then you're probably going to find that you also need to consider scale as being important. Think back to when you were in elementary school. And you go back now and try to sit in an elementary school child's chair, the proportions are correct, but the size of it has been shrunk down equally. We scaled down the chairs. The backrest relative to where the seat is the same as a chair now that you might sit in, but they're smaller. Proportion and scale can be often confused. Scale is the proportion or size of an element in relation to the other elements, whereas proportion is the relationship between the elements in the design. So if we look at scaling something up, we're taking the same proportions of that object and going bigger and bigger and bigger, or smaller and smaller and smaller. We're keeping the sizes of those different parts of, say, the chair, the same size relative to the back to the seat, or the armrests to how far up off the ground the chair is. Proportion and scale can be tricky. I encourage you to dig a little deeper into those terms. Unity is a very easy thing to get your mind around. It's the same usage, consistency, the same colors, the same shapes, the same patterns over and over again. We see this a lot in rhythm. We have a lot of unity. Same thing being repeated, consistent use of design elements. Same color, same windows in that image on the bottom left. Even the tops of these steeples are basically the same. Here, it's the same shapes for these trees all the way around. The same planter that they're potted in. The same color green being used over and over again. Russian nesting dolls, roughly the same size, they just keep getting scaled down as they gradate from one size to the next. And then there's economy. The use of bare minimum of elements. This can be achieved by removing extraneous elements from it. Simplicity in beauty. Less is more. So if we have something that we say, oh, that's beautiful looking, it's usually because it's very simplistic. Tesla does this really well. Things that are overcomplicated tend to have a lot of doodads and gadgets. But that's not economical. So if we look at, say, this car, there's not much there. This concept car is very simplified. There's beauty in its simplicity. All of these things are the principles. They can be combined together. They can utilize and definitely do all of the elements that can also be combined together. But between the 8 elements and the 7 principles, we can start to do a visual analysis of an object. We can describe the object's principles and describe the object's elements. If we were to look at this element or this object, we would say that yes, it has a green color, curved lines, it's horizontal, it's rectangular, there's some cylindrical openings that we would refer to as holes when we're catting, but in this case we'll say something that's circular. They're red on the inside. The red and green contrast each other. The curved line and the horizontal parts work together in a nice balance. This object is symmetrically balanced in a couple of ways, no matter where you put that line of symmetry, whether it's on the top or on the front of the object, you can still get a symmetrical balance to it. Human eyes and emotions respond well to balance. Here's a description of the use of elements of design for this thing. Lines, straight edges, curved tops. It's a bright green and red color. Its shape is geometric with rectangular and circular. It has a solid form that's created by rectangles and circles. Its space around the circular openings in the top, there's a lot of space, but there's depth that's evident in the holes that those circular shapes create. Its texture appears to be smooth, not a lot of roughness or fluffiness to it. These are the elements and principles of design. This is a way that we can use them to provide a visual analysis, which is the beginnings of reverse engineering. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. I hope this helps you with any further note-taking that you need to do. Please let us know if you have any questions. Have a great day.